Welcome back to Ribbon Candy Hooking. I'm Deanna. It's great to see you. Happy Monday. Happy Monday. I've been already getting great weather reports from around the country. I hope it's a beautiful day where you are. Nothing like a nice Monday morning to set you up for the week, huh? And we had such a nice Friday. That's what today's episode is going to be about. I don't want to drive these bed rugs and quilts, this exhibit from Friday, into the ground with boredom, but Friday was such a great day, and there were so many little moments, little nuances, little stories that I just didn't have the time to communicate, either in a live video because it was chaotic um, in a fun way, or on Facebook because it's been a busy weekend. So I thought, let's do that today. Let's come back together. Here's some of the stories that relate to the images that we saw. If you're on Facebook, and if you are not on Facebook, then these will be completely new to you, which will be even more fun. So good morning, everybody. Robin, I can see you're on. Happy Monday. Karen, happy Monday. Doreen, sunny in upstate New York. That's what I'm hearing. Kirsten already chimed in with on the phone this morning. Sunny in Vermont. It's not sunny in Connecticut, but it is very mild, and I'll take it. I will take it. Linda, great to see you in Beverly. Chrissy, happy coffee time, friends. Crystal, great to see you. Do the cookies. You can afford it. You have such a good figure. You should do the cookies. Martha, good to see you. Martha, I'm not even going to say it because you're not going to believe me, but it's getting to be button time for me. I can't believe it, but it is. I've got to work on finishing up a chapter. There's one tweak on the book project I was working on, and that tweak is I need to add some content about if one were to make one of the traditional rugs, for example, the Amish toothbrush or the braided rug, in a different shape. How would one do that? So that's what I need to work on. It's not an overwhelming thing for a book this size and with 14 different techniques. It could have been a lot more feedback, and I guess it might yet, but it hasn't. So I'm happy to do that, and I'm fleshing out an idea on the next book. So I've got that going, but there are lots of windows, and I will never relinquish my time again. I will never create an impossible timeline situation for myself because that almost killed me. I didn't even tell you half of the health problems I was having going in and out of the doctor during that time because of the busyness and the craziness and the stress. It's all stress related. Lack of sleep, all these crazy problems. Not doing that again. Looking forward to a more normal life and some more time together doing this. Let's see. Oh, thanks, Crystal. It was so amazing. I'm going to talk all about it because it was just overwhelming. Paula, I'm so happy to see you. I love the stuff you've been doing with your pouring paint too. That is such a fun thing. You've been doing beautiful work. I'm glad to see you. Linda Ann, happy Monday in Edmonton, Alberta. Great to see you. Dave, also up in Canada and Grey Toronto. You have coffee. That's the thing. That's the cure. Good to see you. Cynthia, good morning. Oh, we've missed you too. Welcome back. Joan, great to see you. Cindy, great to see you in Colorado. And Carol in Wisconsin. All the buddies are on. Aileen, great to see you in Toronto. A little bit warmer but gray, I guess. Same thing, unless you're in different neighborhoods. Sometimes you get a mixed bag in the same city, right? So it's this weird thing itching on my hand. I wonder what I touched. So let's do catching up on some stuff first, and then let's look into our other slideshow and look at some of the stuff that we saw on Friday. So I'm going to get there in just a minute. Oh, so I want to, I think I put the new swatch set slash colors, the Prim Cottage Garden. I think I put that online. That should be online. So that is available. That is up. I wanted to show you, I'm starting to do something different, and it is a bit of a time pig, but lately, when somebody orders who I know you've ordered stuff before, and I know you personally, it's not confusing for me. I know your ability or what you do or what you like, but there's a lot of new people ordering, and I'm super grateful for that. But I don't always know if someone is a complete beginner. The dog is barking like crazy 3 rooms away. Hopefully that's not too disturbing. I'm evolving this idea, but I just want you to know that from now on, all of the kits that go out, whether you're a beginner or not, I'm trying to put them in this format, right? And it's going to get better. So, like, I'm showing, I've got this is going to become more professional, I promise. But I'm putting holes in it, and I'm putting a list on the side. This is the flag was still there set, right? So it comes with a pattern, but I'm just putting them on the page and separating almost needlepoint style the different colors so that for a total beginner, you can see where you're supposed to plug the colors in. I think it'll be helpful. I don't want to just, this is such a tough craft, rug hooking, for beginners to come to, because it's like if you have gotten this far and you have figured out basically the mechanics of how it works and you're ready to give it a try, and you get a kit that isn't like an absolute how to, which they really aren't, it can be like a deal breaker at that point. Like, forget it, you know? So I'm trying to make it as easy as I can with lots of videos, with lots of help inside the kit, for people to be able to distinguish, you know, one color from the next and where they belong in your piece. So I'm going to see how that goes. Um, and otherwise, I've been working on my bedrug designs, and I'm bringing out probably 5 more bedrug designs, hopefully today, if not tomorrow morning, latest. And they are completely inspired by the bedrugs in the exhibit at the Florence Griswold House. Now, I do want to remind you, because I keep forgetting to say, when we took the tour on Friday, Sue, who is our guide, told us that there is like I think a 360 tour on the Florence Griswold Museum site to look at what we saw on Friday. Now, it's never going to be like being there in person, but it's pretty darn close, right? You get the information, um, the inspiration, all of that. So that is available. Heidi, great to see you. So I've been working on bed rugs like crazy because I was super inspired by this exhibit, and the possible crossovers to hooking and punching on any kind of rug making. I absolutely loved the designs. And so I have 2 that I've been working on, and I've had some orders for the bed rugs already, which is great. I just wanted to show you where I am with mine. I did I mean, I haven't had a lot of time. The only bed rug that I'm aware of existing that is an antique bed rug um, is the Connecticut rug. So I was surprised to not see it in the exhibit. It's the one with the 3 flower pots. And it's officially called Connecticut Bed Rug, and it was not there. And I have not had a chance to research why not, because it's my favorite, and it's the one that I'm currently working on here. It's quite big the way that I've made it. I'm going to show you that flower close up. Am I upside down? Am I upside down? Could I be? You know, I'm all right. The flower pots are on the bottom there. But you see, I'm doing a bit more of a realistic thing than I would normally do because of the style. And I'm outlining in this kind of dusty rose color, my absolute all-time favorite color. And I haven't put the center into the flower yet, right? There's a hole right here, little belly button right there, because I haven't decided on the color scheme yet. So I'll let you know as that evolves how that's going. But I have to say, at this moment, I'm so into it. I'm so into it. Doing this rug, I have not had a lot of time. And it got me going on, sorry, I just dropped everything when I stood up. It got me going on more designs. So I'm going to put out the bed rug designs, versions of the bed rugs that I saw there that I thought were the best to translate into hooking. And in some cases, I'm kind of adjusting the symmetry, making them more or less symmetrical in ways that I think will sort of aid the finished look, right? I'm trying to set you up for success with compositions that are very close to the original rug, but without any little snafu possibilities there, because of course they were done with a needle, the bed rugs, not a hook. And for that reason, you know, and because of their scale, there's a lot of detail. So I'm trying to make intelligent decisions and choices about how these bed rugs should look as a line drawing for you to be able to hook so that you are guaranteed success. Thank you. I'm really enjoying that. I'm mixing, doing my cave facet color palette. I'm mixing the kind of dusty rose with tomato reds, with other roses, raspberries, very flat, dull pinks and raspberries. And I'm trying to bring some teals and some kind of indigo blues into the background. So not traditional colors, but just doing some different stuff with color. And I've got a little trick going on with that one that when I'm sure it's working, I'll tell you exactly what I'm doing, and it'll be one of the great rug hooking hacks ever that I've never heard anybody say. So keep your fingers crossed that it continues to work, and I'll show you what I mean hopefully later this week when I get more done. Hey Jill, good to see you. Me too, Martha. I'm just loving that flat. I'm just loving it. I'll take some close-up pictures as I go along, but I'm not going to choose that center color until I have a feel for the overall rug and have plugged in all my important colors. So if there is one thing that came out of this exhibit, I mean, it was so joyful. It was such a warm day, and I can't tell you how good it felt to pull up at the museum. I had picked up my mom because my car is still broken, And so I was driving her, so I had to go get her. And then I picked up one of my buddies from my neighborhood, Janice, who came to a hook-in with us right before COVID. And she said, you know, that was the last thing that I went to, and now this, like with COVID in between. And it was so nice riding up with them, and it was so nice pulling up, parking in the parking lot of the Florence Griswold Museum, and recognizing buddies from online. I mean, it was such a good feeling. There were so many buddies there. There was about 20 of us, and I recognized so many people right away, and it was a great feeling. And there were buddies that I saw. I saw Claire, who I haven't seen for a while, who's one of the little Rhode Island thrummers, because they haven't had a meeting since before COVID. So we talked about that group and some of the people in that group. It was nice catching up there. Peg came from Massachusetts. Three buddies came from Delaware. Dee, who we had tons of fun with and ate out with later, and Lois and Cindy. They came from Delaware. There was a lot of buddies there from a lot of places, and it really was wonderful. Pam, it was great to meet Pam. She's coming to the one in July too, so a lot of us are going to be back there in July on Cape Ann, a little bit of a different location, but looking at more hooked rug exhibit. But it was so much fun, and it was such a sunny, warm day. It could not have been. I mean, I was like starting to sweat my whatever's off because it was getting real sunny. And I can complain about anything, getting real sunny and warm. But it was so nice going through this exhibit. And there was a few things that were takeaways that I want to share with you in slides today. But the main thing for me that was a takeaway was that we have studied hooked rugs, we've studied bed rugs, we've studied a lot on coffee time and cocktail night and in our Design Like classes. By the way, Design Like, the Great American Quilt starts on Wednesday. There's a Wednesday class and a Sunday class this week. Make sure you're signed up if you're interested at all. I will be walking you through kind of more helicopter style, step by step with this class, at least 8 different types of quilt design that lends itself to line-wise rug hooking, punch needle, other forms of rug making. And we will talk about the different genre, for example, Baltimore album, Hawaiian applique, Bedrug is one of them. I'll walk you through at least 8. I'll see time-wise how it breaks down. Different types of rug, designing from different periods, and how to facilitate your design in class so that when we leave the camera after class, you have a bunch of drawings in front of you and you're thinking, any one of these might work. Let me evolve my favorite one and bring it to fruition and transfer it and get going, right? So very good class for that. And you can sign up as late as Wednesday. I will start sending materials out tomorrow, okay? So the main thing that I took away from this Bed Rugs and Quilts exhibit was that while we have studied in detail Jacobean, crewel, Pearl McGowan style interpretations that were very, very stylish in the 50s, 60s, 70s of this Jacobean slash Elizabethan slash black work, needlework style. These were different. And the reason they were different is because the content was different. Now, this is something that if had I but known, I would have locked into this a long time ago, because these designs, particularly on the quilted petticoats and not so much the bed rugs, but more the line-driven things like the clothing and bed curtains, that kind of thing. When things were quilted, women were using designs that were distinctly and uniquely New England. And that really threw me for a loop because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was expecting to see birds eating berries on paisley-shaped leaves, big scrolling, big, Jack and the Beanstalk style vines. We did see that. But in between all of those characters, there were tiny, weird squirrels with weird little, because the drawing doesn't have to be good for it to be quilted into a garment, right? The ability of the person equals what the thing ends up looking like. So weird little squirrels, little sea monsters, mermaids, turtles, salamanders, a clipper ship. Very, very different. Very fish, all kinds of fish. I was super surprised. So I started to put together composites of these things, and I'm going to work on these and bring them out later today or tonight. I decided to work on a pair of, because I was so blown away by the use of, it is still this Jacobean style and the era of this style of embroidery and needlework, but the motifs are very different because they're American, right? And just stories about sea monsters and being so near the sea and mermaids. This is so different. This is something we can really latch onto because for me it brought out my love of these drawings of these garments that I already had built in, but also my sort of patriotism, which is always right there at the surface. It brought all of that out. And I got going with sketching and I decided to do a couple of, my mom used to, when I was growing up, paint staves, like barrel staves for over the door. I thought, let me do a couple of possibly yard longs, long ones to put over a door, that are mermaids. So I'm still sketching them out. These are the two that I just resized them on the printer this morning that are taken from the quilt pictures, right? These are actually in the quilts I'm going to show you in a minute that we saw, petticoats and things like that, that were in this exhibit. Mermaids with fish. I just put together compositions that I thought would work as a long narrow. This one is like a different mermaid. Both of these mermaids appear in the stuff we're about to see, and a weird sea monster, and then some regular fish that are also very sketchy, serpenty. But this sea monster is kind of a seahorse sea monster. So I was working on that, and then I was working on a composite that I hope to have up. I was working on it a minute ago before I logged on, with this beautiful little couple, right? And it's called, the thing was called the Happy Pair, and I'm trying to make it into a design that might, a composite design. I got rid of this chain at the bottom, this kind of marriage chain, because it was too fussy. But I want to make it a tall, narrow, so an odd shape with kind of a sampler composite of creatures that I saw in plants that I saw in these rugs and garments that were different than I'd ever seen before. So not the same old ones. So this is coming out later too, but I've got a couple that is exactly the way they are. They're using a lot in these designs of arrows, right? Because normally these kinds of motifs resolve themselves in a flower or a larger leaf or a paisley. Arrows. And I thought, that's cool. I'm gonna keep a lot of the arrows. We saw a unicorn in one of them, a pair of stags, right? But they're done a little bit differently than I have seen them done before. Fox with like a scroll tail, right? Real different. There's a funky lion. Here's one of the turtles that was used. Here's one of the squirrels that appears. So I'm working on these designs now, and if you are as kind of moved by them as I am, be looking out for them, because in the next hello April, in the next 48 hours for sure, I'll have everything done that revolves around this exhibit. And that sets me up too for some hooking for the next couple of months for sure. So let's look at some of the things. I'll keep an eye on our sidebar. Let's look at some of the things that we saw there, and let's walk through together. And I know some of you saw this stuff on Facebook, so I won't belabor every bit. But this is Sue, and she was our guide. She was excellent. She was really excellent. We walked into an exhibit that looked like this, and again, this is quilt and bed rug. So this is a textile exhibit. There aren't enough bed rugs that we know of to create, I think, just a bed rug exhibit. So they kind of put it together into a larger textile theme. And some of the quilts are garments and some of the quilts are hanging quilts. So let's take a look at how this goes. And I just wanted to show this because if any of you volunteer or do any kind of scavenger hunt stuff, the Florence Griswold always has this feature in their exhibit where kids can do this or grown-ups can do this. They've got a bunch, not just two. They've got a bunch of these different books around that are like laminated pages that say, "Can you find me?" And you find that exact motif, and then you read something on the back about what that is. And I just think that's so cool, particularly if you dare to bring a child into a museum, which at this moment, with the history of my two children inside museums, not so much. But if your children are less feral and more civilized than mine, then this is a great thing to do, or maybe even next year for us. It's a great thing to do when you get inside a big exhibit like this. So this is what the exhibit looks like. It would show us a garment like this, which is a petticoat, which is simply something that you would this would be put on as a kind of a skirt, as an underskirt, because you would layer another garment on top of it, which probably would have a split front to show that you had the wealth to be wearing a petticoat as well. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of slave labor besides women sitting by candles who are not slaves, a lot of labor of all kinds put into creating these garments, right? So it's usually not the people making them who are wearing them because we're talking about different classes of people. So you get something that looks like this, and you see the bar at the bottom, right? So let me bring you in closer. The bar of the bottom is a breakdown that the curator did with computer technology showing you what the lines are on this design. So you can see over here, this is one of the little mermaids. She has something in her hand that to me was distracting, so I altered her. But for, the bones are there. It's the bones of this drawing are there in what I want to hook. Lots of flowers. You see some little creatures here. But, this is the way the exhibit worked. It was like showing you the thing, and here's the thing. Here's the skirt. You see the mermaid right there with the stag to her left, and that more typical and classic sort of Jacobean tree on the right. You got the full information that you needed. It's worth stating for people who are interested in costume. I have a degree in costume construction, right, for the theater. So I did a lot with the history of costume while I was in undergrad. And this is typical petticoat, right? We would never use stuff like this for the theater. We made everything fake and it was only good from, 50 feet away. But with stuff like this, it's worth noting that when you have these petticoats that are very, very finely quilted at the bottom, meaning the stitches are very close together. It almost looks like trapunto. Up top, much more puff involved, and that's because there aren't quite as many stitches, but they are always done on the diagonal because, as you can imagine, when something is quilted diagonally, it makes it much fluffier than up and down, right? Because it gives it a diagonal rise, right? If that makes sense. So if you just picture that, they're all quilted diagonally because they wanted them to look as full as possible. What's the point in luxury material and paid needlework if it doesn't look enormous, overwhelming, and expensive, right? So this is just the first thing that you saw when you walked in, and everyone was just staggered, right? Just unbelievable. There's a mermaid on the skirt. Um, I wish I had known this because it was. I mean, I was just I was like speechless for a while, which is maybe a good thing. Another one of the quilted petticoats, and again, you can see where this is going. There's a bar at the bottom that shows us the design in this one. And again, a real mashup of mythical, true creatures, creatures that would be new, little animals and things like that, to people coming from different countries, right? Plants that would maybe look different coming to different countries. All of this would be stuff that they would try to depict without a lot of familiarity. And for that reason, you get very naive versions of a lot of animals and a lot of plants that were new. We got stuff like this too, which was just beautiful because it crossed over so well. These are valance pieces for a four-poster. So you would get three. The top and bottom are the long ones that would be the runner sides, and then the last one would be on the front of the bed. You wouldn't have one on the headboard side. You'd have the small one on the footboard side and the two long ones on the running sides. So these would be custom made to put up on your bed with curtains, of course, for privacy, because chances are there were several other people sleeping in the bedroom with you, probably your kids, possibly other, aged family members. So certainly curtains, and then stuff like this for decoration if you had the money. Hello, Barbara. So all of this really fed into the feel of the exhibit. I put this up. This is one of the three Foote Bed Rugs. I'm going to go more into that. I wanted to show you spatially how these kinds of exhibits work, because it's amazing how much work goes into this kind of exhibit. This is probably the most elaborate that they've mounted. These are all false walls, right? They had to create walls for each piece, and they had to be sized appropriately, and they had to have certain other sort of specifications, qualifications. So in other words, several of the lenders of these rugs, for example, the Metropolitan Museum lended one, other small house museums lent rugs and quilts. Depending on the policy of the lender, they would sometimes have to not just build a wall, but some lenders require a slant wall, so a slanted wall at an angle, so that the weight of the thing isn't completely hanging on the top bar, right? So they require For you to borrow it, you have to build a slant wall in. So you're looking at it at an angle and it's a bit more relaxed, right? And it doesn't have quite as much strain on it hanging for people to see for the month or two that the exhibit is up. Other lenders like the Met, they won't lend anything unless there is a custom plexiglass case over it to protect it from being touched, people's bags catching it, lots of accidents, right? Lots of not accidents, lots of accidents. I don't know if I told you, I was out with my sister a couple weeks ago. We were just ready to leave and go do some antiquing, and she got called into work because I think I told you this. Somebody had touched a painting at Yale at the British Art Museum. It's like unthinkable, but people do. So there's different specs that every lender gives in order to make the deal to show these different things from different places. And for that reason, it's a lot of work on the host museum, in this case Florence Griswold, because not only are they planning a sort of configuration to accommodate this exact exhibit in the order that they think makes the most sense, but they have also got to accommodate the special demands of every lender, which are always reasonable, right? It's just a lot, and it's a lot of expense. Here's Sue in front of 3 of the bed rugs. Just to give you an idea of scale, they are massive. They are truly massive. Paula says, I majored in fashion design as a post-grad, and watching this makes my day. Oh, I'm not surprised, Paula. We have tons in common, you and I. Tons and tons. I loved working in costume. I just didn't like working in theater. I ended up working at the BBC for a while, making hats and corsets and shoes and specialty stuff. But I didn't like working in theater. Too many personalities there. As I guess any office, right? So, and I'm going to come back to the bed rugs in detail, but this is part of the quilt exhibit. And this is so cool. There's a lot of fading on these quilts, but these are like summer weight. Some of them don't even have batting in them. It's just cloth. And special stitches around the edges, but you can see very sort of patriotic. I also want to say that the curator of this exhibit is putting a book together, but it's not out yet, and it's not ready yet. So it's going to be a little while, and I just want to remind you that when it comes out, I will certainly let you know, because I will certainly buy it, and I will certainly let you know. And if there's any issue with supply, I will drive over and pick a bunch up so that we have them in stock for you to get at cover price. Because if you love this and you want more information, there's not a lot of information. And this exhibit was so rare, such a moment in time. I'll touch more on that again in a minute. Here's Pam and Peg looking at what's a popcorn quilt, right? Never heard of a popcorn quilt before myself, but part of the exhibit, the curator, while she was acquiring, lens for bed covers and quilts, she stumbled upon this genre called the popcorn quilts. Let me show you close up. And she thought, how many designs for popcorn quilts can there be? Well, you'll see if you study the photos, or we'll get better photos even when her book comes out. This is a popcorn quilt for obvious reasons. This is an uncleaned one. The others had been better maintained. There were at least 3 that had an almost identical pattern on them. So this remains a great mystery. Who was designing popcorn quilts in the late 18th, early 19th century? Who was designing them? Because they are truly almost interchangeable. Just a few twigs of the tips of leaves and things. Otherwise, hey, Tad, absolutely identical. So this is one of the mysteries. And one of the other things that she will bring up in her book, the curator, when we see the finished written piece, the academic piece that went along with this exhibit, when we see that, she brings up the popcorn quilt, all of these other lightweight bed coverlets, but also the question of where are these designs that we've been talking about, the mermaids, the sea monsters, who is making them to begin with? Where is the inspiration coming from? Because they are very similar. And these are turning up these motifs of, for example, salamanders, mermaids, sea creatures, turtles, turning up in coverlets and quilts all over the place, well, all over New England. But I mean, it can't be the same person, can it? Because it's all different states. So she feels like she has this great lead, a source in Rhode Island. I think it was Newport, a woman who was teaching these motifs. And then, of course, her students, because young women of a certain class took needlepoint, right? You would go away for school, and this would be one of your big subjects. took away that information to where they lived and shared it. And then we get whatever the plural is, remember that James Lipton book, like The Murder of Crows and all that? Whatever the plural is of mermaids, a something of mermaids right across New England. So that kind of research, that kind of academic focus that she's putting into this book, we will all benefit from that when we read the book and when we get the book. But again, that will be a little ways off. I hear Baby Bell Cheese out there crying at the door to come in. Let me see. I'll let her in a second if she can't stop. If she can't stop crying. She just likes to lay at my feet and lick my toes. So this is one of these great bed rugs. Now, on I can't believe I forgot to print out my text that went along with them. I'll put text up for those of you later as a blog to look at each of these because there was on the Facebook page, I photographed the plaque that went with each one. So, for example, there are some things about this piece that I want to touch on. This is one of the most irregular of the bed quilts. If you look at the border, we see this a lot in the bed quilts, sometimes a larger lamb's tongue border than others, but this is, I'm just going to open the door. Hold on one second. This is a very shallow lamb's tongue, but you can see it's quite different. Come on, sweetheart. It's quite different than, come here, little one. The way that, for example, the scallop motif or the seashell motif has evolved. These really are like lamb's tongues, right? They're long, skinny, tongue-shaped scallops around the edge. And when you look at a piece like this, you can really see where we get the expression lamb's tongue from. And that has evolved into anything that is clamshell or scallop shaped, right? But, Shay, I just opened the door because she was crying. I'll shut it again. Sorry, a lot of buffoonery happening here. Sorry. Come here, baby. Move your little butt. So this is the one that I thought of as a real Jack and the Beanstalk. Yeah, I'm just live. Because of the really very asymmetrical vines going up, the scale of the vines reaching up. We are seeing that type of Tudor rose. We are seeing like the English influence of flowers because this is still based on Jacobean needlepoint and imagery. So we are still getting that in the U.S. This is much more traditional than what we saw quilted, right, on garments. So each of these has its own story, has its own maker, but finally we are seeing some of these images in color because we have only ever seen many of these in black and white. And this is salmon, it's coral, it's cornflower blue, it's indigo. They've used a lot of earthy browns, pink colors. They've obviously done some mixing. They've got a lot going on with blue. They've got those dull greens. I mean, this really is a beautiful, beautiful palette. It's a limited palette. These are all natural dyes. This is probably a wedding quilt. You see the 3 initials up there, so we've probably got the last name and the letters of the first names, he, she, and with the W being that they're now both last names, right? So just another very different one, very lush, fairly traditional, not unlike the one before it, a little bit more symmetrical. But when your eye travels from side to side, you can see while it looks fairly symmetrical, it's not at all. There's much more of a kind of traffic jam of flowers down the right side as opposed to the left side. And they've had a few punches with that very bright blue. It probably was limited. That very navy blue that they had was probably something they were recycling and not dyeing, because it is fairly tough with natural dyes to get that intensity of color. So with the limited amounts that they had, they're punching different areas of it for balance. And of course, it's faded over time. We could not, as you can imagine, flip the rugs over to see the back of them, but it would have looked like a bunch of dit-dot confettis, right? A bunch of dots, like a polka dot. Because of the way that these rugs are made, with a needle pulling many ply yarn through at one time. Karen says, I wonder what books and or poetry were also popular at the time that might have influenced the motifs. You know what? This exhibit is going to give you some clues to that as well. Oh, Nancy, good to see you. Crystal says, popcorns, uniformity of the popcorns is almost looks machine made. Absolutely. It can't possibly be, but it does. They were like robot women doing these things. It was amazing. Just amazing. Another beautiful one. We've seen this one before. This is in almost all browns, but I'll tell you, like the nuances of that, the rosy brown that comes through to almost like Cushing's signature colors, both mummy brown and spice brown. I don't like using the packets, and you know that. That's my biggest problem with Cushing is I cannot deal with those packets. But those are two colors that don't come close to anything else. And of course, mummy brown used to be made for painters by grinding up mummies, right? Very sort of finite supply of those before people start to slap your hands. But at the same time, these are the kinds of spice brown, mummy brown, more toward rose brown that we get with the Cushing palette that we really don't see with other contemporary chemical dyes. But it's amazing to think about what dyes they might have used, for example, for a piece like this, with this much shading, not a huge color palette, but a lot of distinctive color changes. So this is just gorgeous. This is a lot more symmetrical than many of the others we've seen, but if you look at the top two flowers, you can see they are trying to mix it up and keep it different. There is some difference. If you bring your eye down diagonally, you can see above the top flower of the central motif, they did two different flower motifs. So they are trying to keep it lively and interesting and keep some variety happening. There isn't a real push for symmetry. This one is definitely more symmetrical, right? Definitely. So even this one has some minor changes and differences from half to half, but this is probably the most symmetrical of them. I don't know why most of them don't push more towards symmetry, because you think it would be easier to execute, but they don't. And it's almost like they're trying very hard for the variety over the symmetry. This is an exception for sure. There is a lack of symmetry in the very center of that motif in the middle. But all in all, these are real big, fat, crewel style Jacobean flowers, big, fat flower heads that are broken up in that typical style with this feather, sort of serpentine feather design snaking around every one of them. And this is a design, the feather stitch design, that crosses over into quilting. So certainly people, if they were making a bed rug, certainly they knew how to use a needle and would have quilted as well. And we know, if you're also a quilter, that the feather stitch is one of the main and most traditional, oldest motifs for doing the quilting part of your quilt. Here's another one, and this one you probably can't tell by looking at it at this distance, but there were a couple of rugs in this exhibit that were so high pile that at first glance they looked clipped. Yep, that's right, Barbara. They do look like William Morris, because he will borrow from this look. Years and years later, he will borrow. So his look is a lot like this look. And for a very good reason. It's a very successful and clean look. It's very organic, isn't it? And as a naturalist artist, that is something that was really important to him, too. For people who are just designing, New Englanders designing these rugs, wives and sisters and daughters waiting to get married, they would just be looking around for inspiration. And I'll show you a couple Karen just brought up. You know, were there any documents around that would have moved people to, for example, include a unicorn or a turtle? Well, there were, and part of the exhibit focuses on that. This is one of these rugs that was so high piled that it looked clipped, but it was not. It was looped, but the pile was definitely over an inch high. That's a lot of material. But for whatever reason, this one was very lush, plush, cushy. There were a couple that were really high pile, and I had to look at them really close up to get a feel for whether they were clipped. Now, we know, because we've discussed this quite a few times on Coffee Time and Cocktail Night, we know that with many of these bed rugs, the way that, let me bring this image down. Let me come back to you for a second. The way that they did this, I'll just repeat so it's clear in our minds. We don't know exactly what the needle looked like, right? We know that we're talking about a backing that was had to have integrity for this much weight and this much material going through it, but at the same time had to be quite forgiving with holes that would open wide, because each stitch is many ply, right? Some of them, I would say, 10 or more ply of yarn. Crazy, crazy thick stitches. So they were using a tool of some sort, right? That would have had, it could be, you know, the word bodkin has changed over the years too. A bodkin used to be one of those classic tools that women would have on their chatelaine. because you could use it for so many things. The early bodkins sometimes had eyes and had different functions. We could be talking about a tool that is more akin to a bodkin than a sewing needle. Certainly would not be sharp, right? There'd be absolutely no reason for it to be sharp, and it would be a detriment if it was, because then you'd be looking at the possibility of poking an actual hole where you didn't want it. But they would be using a tool with an eye of some sort, because they would need to get all of these individual threads into each stitch, and they wouldn't be doing them one, one, one. They would either be by eye or with something like a chopstick, looping a series of loops over the stick and then pulling the stick out so that the pile would be uniform, right? So this is a technique that goes into the 19th, early 20th century, and people can still use this technique if they want to. It's fussy, but you get quite a few stitches at once, and if you are a very technical person and the pile matters a lot to you, which all through time, right? There have been people who are more technical, less technical. If it matters a lot to you, it's not a bad technique. It still works. So this would be the kind of way that they were working, certainly multiple stitches at once. We would not be doing individual loops like we do as rug hookers now. These are way too time consuming, and the timelining for finishing them seemed to be about a year to 2 years, which, if you think about it in terms of the other 1,000 things that needed to be done in one day, and the fact that you've got limited light until it's candle time, and the fact that, you know, with the seasons coming and going, less light in the winter, um, it's a tall order. But they were getting them done quite quickly. Now, there'd be other people helping them, but it is a tremendous amount of work. And it's remarkable how quickly, because in diaries, like I think it was Elizabeth Foote, it was one of the three Footes that made a rug, Foote, kept a diary, and we know because of her diary that timeline for her rug was under 2 years. So that's extraordinary. Let's come back and look at this one. This one had another great feather stitch motif going around the end. In these colors, it looks like a snake. And for that reason, this color scheme for me isn't my favorite. It touches too much on being like a bit of a true snake pattern. But it is very well articulated. The dark and the light are real pronounced, and that's why, to me, it looks like a snakeskin. But maybe someone else would look at it and go, that's my favorite part, right? This one's also very asymmetrical. The bottom is pretty anchored with symmetry, but then as it gets to the top, you can see they really turned it into kind of an English flower garden. In the middle, they've got that three-pronged shape, right? That's the feather motif that's broken into a three-prong, which lends itself to top and two sides, right? So it's really eases the composition into going organic. And even the top two flowers, those big fat rose type flowers, aren't evenly placed. And that certainly adds to the charm. Another very limited color palette, absolutely no blue here. Why is there blue in some and not others? Well, there's not indigo, right? If you don't have access to indigo, you don't got blue. You're stuck with your nutshells outside and your flowers and your stems, and that's it. So these are all New England rugs without exception. Most of them Connecticut rugs, for whatever reason, bed rugs most popular in Connecticut. We saw a few in New Hampshire, Vermont, but mostly Connecticut. You get what you get. You get your shells and you get your stuff, but if you don't have access to a store that carries pigment like indigo, then you're not going to have blue in anything. So that's a different conversation, and I don't know if this is one of the conversations that's going to be covered when the book on this exhibit comes out, about natural color dye and choice. Not the curator, but Sue, our guide, did not talk about that, and I wish I would have thought to have asked her while we were standing there. Hey, Joan. It was super striking. It was super striking. This one for me is too. This has a real Asian influence to it. Very, very large border, and this is unique for bed rugs. This is one of the ones I'm going to bring out later today or tomorrow as a line drawing, and then you choose your colors. Certainly Asian influence here. I mean, this is without a doubt influenced by Asian pottery and ceramics, right? The colors, the type of flowers, the layout of the design, right? It's a scrolling vine. It's pure Asian. There's very little America here in terms of plants and colors or anything. So this one is dated, what does it say? It can't be 1741. Well, I suppose it could be. And then again, probably a marriage rug because we've got 3 letters, so an R, an E, and a P. when you go through these, either on the blog or on our Facebook page, which is Rug Hooking and Symbol Punch Needle Club, you can see the plaques for each one immediately following the slide of the rug. So you can get a lot more information that way. We can see with these kinds of rugs also, the top and the sides have an Asian influence, but the bottom looks to me more Pen Dutch. And that's where we cross over with more contemporary design that was popular at that time that becomes a more American looking motif, that kind of feathery floral with a suggestion of heart type flowers, right? Crystal says, I'm still stuck on the ground up mummy's bit. No, it's so true. It's crazy. Ground up mummies to make mummy brown paint. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. This was like, of course, the age of like discovering tombs in Egypt and all this stuff. So it was all part of the marketing. But yeah, very strange. Very strange. I guess we're still evolving. Sometimes I look at the news and I wonder, I won't start that. Now, this is one of the Foote rugs. So there were 3 Foote women, and they weren't all sisters, I think. At least one was like married into the Foote family. 3 different Foote women made 3 different rugs, and they are quite similar in their look. The Jack and the Beanstalk one we saw at the beginning was one. This is one, and I'm about to show you the next one. 3 different Foote sisters. But what does this look like? This looks like Elizabethan black work. If you're familiar with what black work looks like, for example, if you've seen portraits of Queen Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, the first Queen Elizabeth, she's got a lot of black work going on. That is what was in vogue at that time. Really, each flower is broken down almost like a sampler in stitches, right? So this wouldn't lend itself super well unless you're a great Riddermere School of Hooking master. It doesn't lend itself naturally or easily to hooking because of the amount of detail in each component. But having said that, it gives you a good color scheme, and I know because of our Riddermere segment that they taught hooking with these very fancy stitches that are more akin to needlework or needlepoint than they are to hooking. So not impossible. This is a pile rug that was done with these fancy stitches, but again, the scale of this is massive. So this is something that an experienced hooker could look at and say, I'm going to try to replicate this exactly. For a beginner, this would be extremely hard to pull off. But as an image, you could hook it in solid colors or color-changing mottled colors for the same effect. Be absolutely beautiful. My point is the amount of work that went into these Foote quilts is astonishing. Bed rugs. This is the third. So you can see a lot more dark indigo colors, still the blue and white, but much, much darker, right? So this person preferred or had access to, this Foote had access to a lot of the darker quantity of it, enough to pull this off with this much contrast. These are extraordinary. And one of the things that came out of the conversation while we were standing in this alcove with the 3 Foote quilts was that, number one, these bed rugs, this collection of bed rugs has never been together. Some of them were in the Wadsworth Athenaeum in Hartford, exhibit 1972. That was the year I was born. That was 50 years ago, right? And now some of them have come together again, but this collection has not ever been together as a collection. So once this exhibit is over, that is it. What are the chances that in our lifetime, this collection will be in the same building again? It's like 0, isn't it? So that in itself is sad, a bit of an emotional twist. Another sentiment that brought up a lot of high emotion during this talk was standing in that alcove with the 3 Foote quilts, because Sue told us, she said, these 3 quilts bed rugs, have never been in the same building before. Because when they were made, they went to married houses in different states, right? So they were made with other members of the family visiting or whatever, but they have never been in the same room before, as far as we know. Why would they be? They were on people's beds, right, in different states. This is the first time, after all of these years, that these 3 family bed rugs have been together, side by side. We were all getting a bit teary-eyed and choked up because it's a big thought, isn't it? It's one of these overarching thoughts that really hits you in the heart because it's so meaningful and it's so poignant. It was one of the best moments of this tour. So this is the 3rd and last Foote quilt. Let me spring through the rest because we're getting late. Let me see. Come back to my slideshow here. Oh, I'm sorry, close-up of that 3rd Foote quilt. And you can see, detail-wise, this is just absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning. It's incredible, isn't it? Um, and okay, so I'm showing you the third one again. This is Phoebe Foote. I think we saw this one earlier. This almost looks like a medical staff, the composition of it for me. But this is one that was right around the corner in the same alcove. But I just put it there again so you could look and see that all 3 Foote bed rugs are the blue and white palette, like a Delft palette or darker. And remember, indigo would be something that you could get in seafaring communities or from a peddler that was coming from the shore inland to your community and would have something like, if there was a demand for it in your immediate neighborhood, indigo that you could dye with. This is another great example of the old time lamb's tongue, right? Coming up around those edges, shaped like a tongue and not a scallop, right? This is the original lamb's tongue. And now we've got, oh, this is just Sue standing in front of that one that was very Asian. She's smiling in this one because I showed a picture of her that she didn't look so happy before, and I felt bad because she was so gregarious and helpful and forthcoming. The reason I included this was because this is a traveling box or whatever of that day, and it's lined with wallpaper of that day. And the wallpaper is very, very similar to the designs on the bed rugs. So when we say where else are they getting ideas from, you know, if they don't have a great imagination, stuff like this, like you open a little box and it's lined with wallpaper, or the wallpaper on your own walls, this is where they're getting the ideas from. This is what's contemporary. End papers and books would also look like this. Oh, a little bit of a diversion here. This was, the requirement of this one was that it had to be under plexiglass and lay flat. It's a quilt, but I just wanted to show you because this is one of the more pronounced American motif quilts. This is one I'm working on right now too, to create as a sort of more adapted rug hooking pattern or punch pattern. On at least the left-hand side I love because you see there's a packet ship there. And the mermaid, a different mermaid, I can't make out what she's holding at all. And I'll probably eliminate that from the design that I do, but certainly keep the packet clip, the waves, the seagulls, and the mermaid, right? So I'm working on a design with that in the middle, and I'll have that out in the next couple of days for you if you're interested in that. I'm definitely working on that. Here's another example of a print, right, that was readily available that people would have seen, could have seen in books or framed. And I think I can come into it a little bit closer. A print of the day where it was a bit of a, let me come back for a second. It's a bunch of animals at the bottom. Some mythical, some real animals, but there's a huge collection of animals in the print. And then when we look at what they've pulled out close up, they've done a crop and taken some of these animals out to show us. And these are some of the very animals that are in that. So we see like a dromedary, like the camel, a very healthy looking bunny, some kind of a lion or big cat, and then the unicorn. So possibly holding a comb. I don't know, Kirsten. It looks more like a box than a comb. It's not impossible that it be a comb. It fits in with the costume of that day, so it's not impossible. All of their hair is down, so I wonder why they would be holding. It's not impossible. I have to take another look at it. It's a very good idea. We see a lot of mermaids holding mirrors and combs now because of Ralph Cahoon's work in the 20th century. But I would be real curious to know whether, I don't have time to research it, but I would love to know whether the idea of putting a mermaid with a mirror or comb in her hand is something that goes back to this period, you know, earlier than the 20th century. That would be something worth researching. It would just be a good sort of feather in the cap to know that. So more inspiration looking at this kind of article and stump work. We talk about stump work often. I have yet to do a full episode on it. Maybe that'll be something coming up. But stump work was three-dimensional needlepoint. It's making a little bit of a renaissance, but it is extremely labor intensive. Let me show you what stump work looks like close up. By the way, I'll tell you when we finish. There's a reflection because there's glass, so I'm sorry about that. But you can see it does have that 1970s trapunto look. This is a much older piece. This is Elizabethan era piece. But you can see the size, the scale of the flowers, the costumes, this kind of thing, the busyness of it. The pear tree is a big motif. All of this would have been great inspiration and fodder for designing a quilt pattern, or bed rug, anything like that. There was also one of the designs, I put it in the Facebook slideshow, and I'll work it into a blog for Ribbon Candy Hooking. But there's also a picture, a very American scene of a man with a stick prodding a pear off a pear tree, right? So it's not that pear trees don't exist in other places. It's just that that was one of the many in this exhibit, really unique um, drawings, right? Pictures that were used to quilt with, designs, because it's a moment in life. It's a small moment in life when somebody stops with his walking stick to knock the right pear, the most luscious looking pear, off the tree. And it's just those little references to daily life so long ago that make these really come alive, right? Because they're a bit overwhelming. The lines, the work, it's a bit overwhelming, but when you see those little touches, it really feels like it was just another time. These were just our ancestors. These were just other people having the same kinds of lives and the same kinds of little moments that we have still and hopefully always will. So it was just a beautiful exhibit for feeling. It had a great feel to it. Karen says, they remind me of the large tapestries you would see in European cities. Yeah, they do. A little less involved, right? I mean, the tapestries that you're seeing as like insulation on castle walls and stuff are woven. You get a lot of details. The bed rug's a lot less detail. I think that's because of the tools, the limited work day, the remoteness of most people, their living situation, living remotely, even outside a village, you know, not having a lot of neighbors to help out. It being a tall order to execute one of these, and part of the reason why there's so few of these in existence. There's probably a lot more that were made, but that were not kept because there was no way of cleaning these or the quilts. So people wouldn't. And, you know, not to be disgusting, but when I think of the amount of times that my kids have pooped or barfed on a bed, right, particularly when they're little, barfing still. But, you know, I think I've thrown out everything, everything that we started with. I'm guessing that kids had the same problems in the 17th and 18th centuries. It's amazing that anything could be kept in good condition without being able to launder it properly, and you really could not launder these at all. So they are what they are, and they are in remarkable shape for what they are. I just wanted to add that that box that we looked at with that wallpaper liner is so important because that box contained the document that permitted the Plymouth plantation to expand. So that particular box actually held one of the most important early American documents because it allowed the Plymouth community, right, who were on a kind of grant is the wrong word, but their move to the New World, you know, a lot of these early communities along the seashore was funded by the British Crown, which is part of the reason why hundreds of years later the British Crown still wanted to charge taxes because they had funded all of this. And not every community was financially viable because the point was people would come and live there and then they would make a profit like any business would and should and send some of the money back. And that didn't slash hardly happened, the profit part, because life was so difficult and they encountered a lot of problems with people who were already living here, food, seasons, plants they weren't familiar with. These were not always successful communities. So that's part of the reason that this document is so important was because they were granted permission to expand. They must have been doing well enough that it was like, okay, you can have a promotion, get a little bit bigger, you know, encroach over. We'll leave the whole, everything that goes with that aside because it was obviously a moment in time and it's an interesting and important part of our history. So that's an important box to have along too. I mean, it's like something that would hold the equivalent of the Magna Carta, right? I mean, it's so important. But what a beautiful exhibit. And it's on, I think, this week. I'm not sure how much longer it's on. If you couldn't make it on Friday with us, try to get over there. And then we went to see the house itself and see where the artist painted, see a ton, dozens of paintings are up by the artist that we talked about last Monday and Wednesday, prepping for this field trip. So besides the exhibit, there is the house, that cradle of American Impressionism, and all of the artist's work. I think almost every artist that painted there is represented with an original painting still there. So it was a wonderful day trip. It really was so much fun. And it was so great to see people in person. I wish it could be all of us. I wish we could all step on some kind of a weird Star Trek holodeck and just transport to the same place at the same time. Um, Maybe in our lifetimes, things are moving so fast. So let me see. Mermaids holding combs. Yep. I'm hoping it is. Joan says the mermaid is represented as the upper half of a beautiful maiden joined to the lower half of a fish and usually holding a comb in the right hand and a mirror in the left. And Karen says they reminded me of the large tapestries, yep, of the European cities. Absolutely. Joan says mermaids have been tightly linked to sirens, beautiful women, and even more beautiful voices to lure sailors to their death. They were connected to beauty, seduction, the brushes, mirrors, maybe. Yeah, it's hard to know whether, because brushes and mirrors are like symbols of vanity too. So that's a whole other side conversation. Once you open the can on a conversation like this, it's like one of those prank springs, spring snakes comes flying out in your face because it's so much and it can lead you in so many different directions and they're all worth pursuing. So if you end up brainstorming any of this stuff and you want to share it with the rest of us, please write it to me or put it on our Facebook page so we can all share what you know or what you found out. I'm going to be getting back to work because this has been a fooling around day on Friday means one less day of work. I need to catch up a little bit. Oh, thank you. Well, it was good to wrap that up, right? That whole conversation. I'm still hot on bed rugs. I really am, and these quilts. So I'm going to be working on this a little bit and getting the quilt class together. I hope I see you Wednesday or Sunday for designing like the Great American Quilt because it will be our best design like class yet for creating your own original designs and really continuing with this kind of conversation about design that borrows from quilting, right? And that includes the bed rugs and the quilts that we just looked at. So I might even use some of the motifs that I'm peeling from some of these garments in that class so that you can use them too and have it be your line drawing, whatever kind of composition you want. And of course, I'll help get you there too. So otherwise, I will see you on Wednesday for our next coffee time. And I'm not sure what the subject is yet, but I will figure it out before then. Remember that this set is up. And otherwise, I'm working on orders, getting some stuff done. I'll try to work on this guy if I get some free Mary Tyler Moore time tonight to myself. Otherwise, have a great afternoon, everybody. Have a great day tomorrow. And I will see you for coffee time on Wednesday, same time, noon Eastern Standard Time. Please like, comment, subscribe, all the things you do to keep the channel visible. Those of you who are Patreon subscribers, I really appreciate your support. There's information on being a patron of this channel in the text of this, along with some relevant links that I just tipped on in the description